Hello, and welcome to BA 339, Operations and Quality Management. I'm Elizabeth Gibson, and in order to really understand operations management, we have to talk a little bit about managing processes and what are the capabilities of those processes. So the agenda for today is why, what, and the how of operational processes. So we're going to first talk about the strategy. We're going to then talk a little bit more about process capability, that's how they work, and innovation. So what is the process design and how do you create them to have a good process? Putting all of these three together, we're going to integrate the processes with the strategy. All right, starting with the strategy. Strategic planning is typically done in a hierarchical fashion. What does that mean? It's usually tops down. So starting with the corporate culture, the mission statement, what businesses should we be in? Why? That's talking about your corporate strategy. And then supporting that are the business strategies. The businesses is how do we compete? And out of that come these strategic business units, your SBUs. Now some companies can have just a couple to very many. Now supporting those SBUs are operations strategies. These are functional now. How do we best support the SBU and their strategy? And then there's other functions that support that. Finance, marketing strategies. Now I want to make note here that functions are different than processes. The process is how we do that work. Key elements in strategic planning is these three components of the business model. Why do we do the work? That's the value proposition. What are the mechanisms to build and deliver that value, and what are those capabilities? That's that business logic in the process. And then we have to remember the customer is really critical. If they're not happy, it doesn't make a difference. So let's talk a little bit about value. Value is really difficult to define, but critically important. There's many different value perspectives. I think we're starting to get a little bit of a handle on that. I mean, even operations has a different value and a different perspective maybe looking at the operation than maybe somebody working in the supply chain who might be really interested about the flow. And somebody in quality might be looking at the value of the customer and the specifications. So just take a minute and think, well, how could I apply it? Is to maybe like value stock, and a lot of these terms we throw around. Value pricing. If you see, hey, you know, we have a special, we're really targeting this value pricing. What does that mean? And the value to whom? Value proposition. That's really all about the customer. And customers have different perspectives. So the first thing is really getting a handle on that value before you can create the value. Okay, and creating the value, this is about the strategy. Okay, so it's problem solving skills, designing solutions for customer needs. But customer needs different things. Okay, what do they value? And then transforming, changing the physical form of the materials or information to get it to the customers, and then the information management, bringing together information or resources in a way that are valuable to customers. Okay, so you have different components that go into creating value, and it's really pretty tricky because it's hard to define in the first place. All right, so let's delve a little bit deeper and apply it to a case study. So competitive priorities. Now, you might recall this slide from the introduction, but this would be maybe all of different processes to get a bottle of wine, from growing the grapes to your customer so they can buy it in the grocery store. And some of the priorities that you need to be focused on from a product service perspective would be quality, timeliness, and cost. Now from a process perspective, we want to be looking at designing value into the innovation, flexibility, sustainability, and really taking a look at the risk management systems. Okay, so I said we would apply this to an example. Let's take a couple of companies that are very different but very successful. Let's compare Dell and Apple, two incredibly different companies. What do their customers value and what's their unique proposition? they're both in the computer industry, right? But Dell's customers are very different from Apple's. Dell's customers are more experienced. They're not looking for a lot of technical assistance or hand-holding. They're somewhat price sensitive, and they're pretty good planners. They're willing to wait for an order. Apple customers, give me that shiny new right out of the box now. Okay, the customer base, typically more inexperienced. The Genius Bar, pretty cool, always busy when I go by in the mall. Price isn't really the main driver, it's that immediate gratification. And if you've ever really looked at an Apple product, I think people save their boxes not because they have to, but because they are just so cool, right? Everything's designed in an Apple product. Are you starting to see the difference here in the value or the unique proposition? So that falls down then to supply chain considerations, okay? For Dell, you have custom design and delivery processes. It's really about the delivery. There's less focus downstream because they don't need to stock as much in the stores. They don't have that instant gratification. And build to order, that's really doing a lean process all the way through. Now, Apple on the other side, we have stores in malls. That's pretty good and hefty downstream emphasis. There's immediate gratification. Boy, if I walked in at Christmas time to buy an Apple computer for my kids and I couldn't walk out of the store with it, I wouldn't be instantly gratified. So there's a lot more stock being carried in the stores, and the products have to be more standardized. Not as much customization, not build to order. All right, so how do we do some of this analysis? I understand that some of these pictures are going to be pretty difficult to read, but these pictures are coming right out of your textbook. So this one's 2.5. And the reason I put this in here is because this is a balanced scorecard. Now, the balanced scorecard is a very popular tool, and it gives you a template to analyze the customer, the financial, the business processes, the opportunity for the customer, and where we're looking at learning and growth. So it gives you this balanced perspective and allows you to score it. So this could be considered a good and common strategic analysis tool. Another one is the SCORE model. This comes from figure 2.6. This is pretty good example, and there's a lot of detail in the book. This could be another strategic analysis tool you might want to practice and apply it to a company of your choice. The SWOT is really popular because it's pretty easy to use. It's asking a bunch of questions and you fill out the different boxes. So you're identifying internal and external factors. Let's just take a look at the strength box right there. So you'd be looking and answering, well, what advantages do we have to offer our customer? What do we do better than anyone else? What is our unique value? What do our customers see as our strengths? That might be different than what we see as our strengths. And so on. You do the same thing for the weaknesses from an internal perspective, then the opportunities and the threats are from the external perspective. What's happening outside your company? All right. So once you get this strategic analysis, now you need to look at the processes and capacity. Okay, and start thinking instead of functions, marketing, supply, you're thinking about what are the processes that are linked together. Okay, so supply chain is really about linking these processes together and process thinking. Okay, it's a way of viewing activities to supply that value to the customer. So now what you're going to want to start doing is mapping these processes out and then looking at the capacity or how much can flow through each of these processes. So then you can start looking at terms like bottlenecks or critical constraints. Let's take a look and see how that works. Okay, first you're going to want to get a handle and list out. Actually just take a list with some sticky notes or identify what all of the different processes might be. We also saw that business model canvas. You could just also make a matrix like this one on table 3.1. Here's some of the major types of business processes. Use these tables to see if you're missing anything when you try and map it out. You're going to have inputs to your processes and outputs to your process. So you're going to want to define what your process is, look at those key inputs and what you're expecting as outputs. That's the first step in mapping all of your processes. Okay, you can't really start linking them, or you don't want to start linking them until you have all of the pieces. It'd be like, you don't want to start building a puzzle if you don't have all the pieces. You get all your pieces together, and then you get your strategy about how to link them together. Okay, here's an example that I thought was pretty useful on 3.5. So I just ran through this. You can visualize the system once you map all the processes together and link them in a flow. And you can see the purple and the green, these are different components of the processes. Okay, so you need to have a good map. You need to identify what the inputs and the outputs are of each process and then put them in order. Okay, so they must be managed because they're going to change. And you need to know what and when to improve the system so you can be successful. Remember, putting all these processes together make a system, and that's what we're looking for. Once you have your map, your process map, now it's time to look at capacity. What is capacity? Well, capacity is the amount of output that a process can deliver, constrained by the amount of inputs that you put into it. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to make each process efficient so we are getting as much output as we can for as little input as possible. That helps us with our spend management, our flow, our rate, our delivery. All right, so let's take a look at some of these concepts for capacity planning. What we're looking at is rates, two kinds of rates. There's throughput. How fast does something go through our process? And how many can we get through? The other rate is yield. How much loss do we have? Now think about this. You can be really fast at something, but maybe you're damaging things or it's not quite as good of quality. So there's a trade-off here, right? Here's a process, this is again from the book, that talks about the flow for circuit boards. Now, looking at A to B to C to D, what you notice about this is they're all in a line. That would be a serial process versus a parallel process that we'll talk about. And you see that there's different times that it takes, or different capacities that each of these process steps can handle going through. A, you can get 325 boards per hour. B, 400. So what would be the limiting capacity in this process? Well, take a look at all of those numbers, and you can only get 275 boards per hour through C. So it doesn't matter if I improved A and I could get 1,000 boards per hour. I'm still capacity limited because of C. So where would you want to do your improvements? I'd want to do it at C. Okay? And that's what the theory of constraints is about. A really good and easy text that's pretty popular is by Eli Goldratt. Might be an interesting one to take a look at if you're more interested in this topic. So other capacity planning concepts. Now when you've identified the bottleneck or the critical process that's limiting that capacity, you can take a look at ways to improve it. Now, you're going to make improvements with economies of scale, we've heard about that, and learning curves. So economies of scale mean, well, we can typically do processes faster if we have batch jobs than if you're doing them just in series, okay? Learning curves mean you should be able to do something faster the second time or with more experience. See, the dotted blue line is going down. That means as we have more experience, maybe we can get more efficient and faster because we're learning, okay? And so you have the rising score or the output as we learn. Okay, so those are kind of inverse there. And wait times, That's a real important concept that we'll talk about a little bit more, especially in service industries. Boy, if I was that guy on the stretcher, I don't know how long I'd want to be waiting. It could be from the range of inconvenient or critical, and that's part of knowing your customer too, as far as what process you want to pick and improve. So there is the throughput or the rate, we have wait times, we have learning curves, we have economies of scale, and all of those you're going to make trade-offs. These are just an overview of the concepts. The book delves much deeper and provides some really good examples. All right, so let's talk about more of the critical processes, because it's not just going to be one or another. You're going to want to look at all of these processes and do some assessment about what's critical for that operation. Okay, bottleneck, that relates to that flow picture of the circuit board where C would essentially be a bottleneck, right? You could imagine if you were trying to push 1,000 through, what would happen when it got to C? Well, they'd all be stacking up right around C, wouldn't they? Okay. Other ones that are critical, if they're visible to the customer, it doesn't really matter if you can process or improve that C, or maybe you bring people in on overtime on that one process, if it's not visible to the customer. But you don't want to have those long wait times or inconvenience the customer. So I think you get that. Look at the ones where there's the greatest variance also. So if you had a severe bottleneck where something was broken or aging, or you could only get 10 through and another machine could get 100 through an hour, you'd really, because there was a big variance. A variance is the difference, okay? So there would be 90 units per hour difference. You'd want to work on the one that's the severe or greatest variance. All right, so now that you have a handle, you've mapped these processes, you've looked at the inputs and the outputs, and you've done some assessment about what's critical. Now it's time for innovation. So how do we improve them, and what are we doing here? Okay, so you're bringing in new product designs, new process designs, or product and process design. One of the things I love about this area, operations and quality management, is it's both product and process design dependent. All right, some tools here. Now, what do you mean by that? Ooh, process and product. Okay, that means you're taking those concerns about the customer, market drivers, market conditions, customer pains, and you're matching them up with the product or process features. Now, this tool can also be used in quality, but the quality function deployment tool will match. It's an assessment tool to match customer demand or customer drivers, customer values to product or service features. Here's an example. It's a housekeeping service. I wanted to pick a service industry so you could see how it could also work to the service. And this is just a way of mapping those, and the ones with the highest intersection or correlation, those would be the most critical and what you would want to work on. So it's a way to help you hone in and really zero in on what you want to improve. All right, so in summary, we were really looking at how to get a handle on strategy, and strategy is really figuring out why we're doing something and the approach we'd want to take. Okay, so it's first important to understand that unique value proposition. If you don't have the unique value proposition, you might start working on those wrong processes. So that's really getting out and understanding that customer need. View supply chain operations is a collection of all of these processes and not functions. Okay, so think they're the processes that are the logic. Okay, it's that logic, it's that thinking, it's this chain of all of these processes put together in an order that can get that product or the value to the customer fastest, with the best quality, with the less pain, the least waiting times, highest quality, whatever is the value to your customer. Okay, and innovative capacity planning is required. Even the best design has to change to sustain that value. So you will be changing these processes. So having a good change management system is going to be key as well. All right, that was a lot to absorb here about the processes inside operations. This is Elizabeth, and I'll see you online.